Welcome back. Today we are talking with Anne Travers about the living with the impacts of terrorism. And I can't express. I don't know if I've got the words to express the the amount of gratitude I have for you for sharing your story there in segment two. Um, let's jump ahead a few years. There's some things that came out of that situation.
Yes, so as I said, I moved over to England and then we moved back again. And in 2011, I had dropped my younger children up to school, and I just come home and was sitting having my cup of coffee before I got started into what I had to do for the day. And I received a phone call from a journalist, from a BBC researcher for Radio Ulster, for a program called Talkback, to ask me if I knew that Mary McCardle, the woman who'd been convicted of Mary's murder and released under Good Friday Agreement, had been appointed as special advisor to the Sinn Féin culture minister. Now, I don't think I'm going to be able to explain adequately to your viewers and to yourself, Alex, just how even hearing Mary McCardle's name being said by somebody else, the impact that that had on me. It took me, it was like a train came and hit me from the side. I couldn't speak. I asked the researcher if she could phone me back in 5 minutes. And I just felt all the oxygen leave my body. And I moved onto a chair at the window and I just rang one of my brothers and I said, Mary McCarthy's been appointed special advisor to Sinn Féin minister and culture minister. And I was just in, I was back there. I was back down running down Windsor Avenue. I could see Mary lying on top of mum. I could see my dad lying on the ground. I was just reliving it all again, every single moment of it. And the researcher, phoned back, and to be honest, I didn't even really know what a special advisor was. Um, but it was then when I realised this position was gifted to her. She had been known as OC, so officer in command in prison for the IRA in the women's prison. So she'd been the OC over this culture minister, Karen Cullen. And really, she was being gifted this position as a reward for all that she had done in her service and time in the IRA. Now, there was a team, a historical inquiries team, which did reviews of murders in Northern Ireland, and they had been reviewing my sister's murder, and they'd written to Mary McCardle to ask her for any help because Sinn Féin had signed up to policing, they'd signed up that things were changing, and she ignored the letter. She wouldn't give any help to our family to try to give answers of who was the gunman who murdered my sister, or just to give us something. She wouldn't give us anything. So I anyway was in absolute state of shock. My mum was still alive. My dad died in 2009, and uh, I just thought, there's my mum, a taxpayer who was basically paying for her daughter's killer, to have this position. And because I was in so much shock, and I did this interview on this radio program, suddenly the media all came, at the BBC, at Ulster Television, lots of different interest. And I was on the media a lot, sort of explaining why I was so upset and why I was so distraught. I looked up the Good Friday Agreement to see where the victims' rights were in this. Where were the victims' rights not to be re-traumatized? And there was nothing. I realized at that point that actually the Good Friday Agreement mentions victims twice, but it's not offer any benefit for victims and survivors. Victims and survivors had to um, give up so much for peace. They lost their loved ones, they lost limbs, they're living with trauma, and then they had to agree to prisoners and people who murdered their loved ones be released from prison. And now, with a situation where those people who have been found guilty of murder were now being rewarded in top jobs, being paid £90,000 sterling a year, top paying jobs. And I stupidly thought actually Sinn Féin had changed. And I kind of thought that by going on to the media and that maybe they would say, look, we didn't realise, just how difficult, we see how hard this has affected the Travers family, and we will rethink it. And although we think Mary should have this job, we'll rethink it and maybe have discussions and see what we can do. Instead, I was patronized. Um, Martin McGuinness, who is deceased, who was a deputy first minister at that time, said on radio that it was obvious it was having a neuralgic effect on me. Um, I don't know, neuralgia is nerve pains. I really don't know what he meant by that. So I wrote to all of the MLAs, who are the ministers up in the Northern Ireland Executive, and I asked them what could be done. I had an appointment with the First Minister, Peter Robinson, and I went to see him. I was so naive. I was just going into my own. I had no idea about politics. I was a mother. I had never found myself in this situation. No idea. And I, the First Minister at that time said, well, look, there is something we can do to stop it from happening again, but we can't apply this retrospectively. And another MLA came along called Jim Allister, and he was from a legal background. He was a barrister. He'd actually appeared up in front of court as a barrister in front of my dad, so we knew my dad. And he said, look, I think that we can apply this retrospectively. I think there is a way that we can do legislation for this. So I worked along with him. And basically, during that time of trying to do this lobbying, it was really difficult. I was getting trolled unmercifully on Twitter, on my Twitter. Um, had been made, I had been invited to join the Victims Forum, which is like an official sort of forum with the Victims Commission, um, in 2012. But within that, there would have been Republicans within that, who bullied me unmercifully. They ignored me. They I'd walk into the loos and they'd all go quiet or come out. There was no support there. And the support I did get was from victims and survivors of Republican terrorism, where I actually then met my now boss, Kenny Donaldson. And it was a very difficult time. I had a miscarriage. I lost a baby just actually I was about 12 weeks pregnant and I lost. So that happened on the 18th of May. That appointment was announced and I lost the baby in towards the end of June. I developed breast cancer. So during the time I was having my treatment for breast cancer, it's going to have still going up in lobbying. But I'm pleased to say that in 2013, the Special Advisors Bill became law, and also known as Anne's Law. And it's known as Anne's Law. It was named by Jim Allister as Anne's Law because my sister Mary and Mary McCardle shared the same names. And this prevents anybody with a serious criminal conviction from being gifted the position of special advisor. However, they can have that position and they may take up that role if they agree to help the family, whether it is even just by apologizing to the family, um, being remorseful for what they did, or if it's by helping them bring further justice. Unfortunately, within Sinn Féin special advisors, there were a couple who had murdered people, and they decided that they were going to lose their jobs, and they decided they didn't want to help the families, so they lost their jobs. That has left me very unpopular within Republican circles and within the ex-community, Republican ex-prisoners. But I would like to let them know that I would always be for rehabilitation and people being able to get on with their lives once they've served their time. But I do think that you need to think about your victim as well. It's like having the rapist move into the house next door, who's raped you. Society wouldn't accept that. It wouldn't be comfortable. They'd be ordered by the courts to live a distance away from their victim.
Mm-hmm.
And we as victims and survivors from the Troubles who've had loved ones murdered, we feel no differently. And it's so important that people understand the trauma that we are still living with. As I mentioned in one of the earlier segments, we didn't have counseling, we didn't have help. So many of us are suffering from anxiety, PTSD, and we live with long-term illness, autoimmune disease. I mean, Northern Ireland is just so high for that. And it's so important that people are careful with their language and what they do. So I now work for, as I said, for a charity as an advocate for victims and survivors of terrorism from both loyalist, Republican, and those killed by the state. And I'm passionate about victims' rights and about the fact that they need to be acknowledged that what happened to them was wrong.
And thank you so much for sharing all this information. I know there are people, unfortunately, around the globe that are victims of terrorism. In I think every country probably has some sort of community or person, organization, something that has been impacted by terrorism. We're all impacted by it. And for you to come on the show and talk about that, I applaud you for standing up for Mary, standing up for your family, your community, and for those that are impacted and may not feel they have a voice. So thank you so much for sharing your story. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Alex. And as I said, everything I do for my sister Mary.
And that's a wonderful way to end the show. Thank you, Anne, and everybody watching and listening. Stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.